Hey everybody, how are you doing today? I'm thrilled to be here. So to find opportunities in fragmentation, I think it's time for us to change the way we think. As I walked around, I was very happy to see some folks that I've known for many years who have been chiseling away, I guess grinding away at the coal face of the future of television for many, many years. And I'm very gratified to be back here addressing you and talking to you about this. In 1990, I was working with MTV as a young man. And they asked me to head off to Asia and launch MTV in Asia. And at that time, it was like the wild, wild east. There were no multi-channel TV systems in Asia. So we launched the very first one with Star TV. And that was a wild experience. I came back to New York, and I was at MTV. I was running the on-air creative department there under Abby Turcouli and Judy McGrath. And I was very excited about the digital future because when we launched MTV in Asia, it was fully digital. It was one of the first fully digital systems from post-production and production all the way through to transmission. And so I came back to New York where everything was still very analog. And I said, hey, we have to get into digital technology. And I was interested in the 16-bit game consoles at the time and this thing called dial-up bulletin board services. It was before people were using the web. And so I convened a meeting of all the heads of the TV channels at MTV Networks. And it was a very short meeting because one of the executives from Nickelodeon stood up and said, I don't know why I'm here. I'm trying to run a cable network. And so that was a little bit of a disappointing meeting, but it was very early days, right? This is 1993. If you think back to that time, we had barely gotten computers in the offices. So it was a little abstract for a TV company to think about its digital future in those days. What struck me as so amazing, though, is that that attitude still persists in a lot of television companies. A lot of the people who are responsible for programming and distribution, they don't really focus on the digital experience. They don't really focus on that as primary or, more importantly, as the growth opportunity. And sometimes you see people openly dismissive or maybe obstinately resistant to embracing digital technology. Jeff Bewkes at Time Warner recently said this at the cable show about a year ago. He said, hey, let's all cheer up. We're not in the music business. It's morning in the cable TV business. There's some truth to that. So if you look at last year's earnings, the TV industry has done extraordinarily well. The big media companies, fueled largely by their earnings in television. Look at Comcast at the very top, doing extraordinarily well. However, since he brought up the comparison to the music industry, I thought it would be fair and relevant to take a look at the music industry. And if you see, I made a circle there. Back in 1999 and 2000, when the earnings per person in the United States, per capita, were about $71, and that's in 2011 dollars. So per capita revenue, $71, that was the absolute peak. The big orange thing in the middle, that's CD sales, of course. And then if you notice, if you take a look at the right side of the diagram, that peak year of 2000, that's also when Napster was introduced. So that's when disruption occurred, and you can see what happened. In a very short period of time, in about 10 years, the industry dropped to about a quarter of its size. By the way, there was good news this week. I don't know if you saw the announcement yesterday, but for the first time since 1999, the music industry is starting to see an uptick, an uptick in earnings. So actually they may have reached the turning point as they've converted into a kind of a service-based system. What's interesting about looking at the music industry as an analogy is that you'll see something very similar when you look at print. So the print business, here's a diagram that shows newspaper revenue, advertising dollars from 1950 to 2010. And when you get to the right side, you see that industry also contracted very quickly from a $60 billion industry to an $11 billion industry in a 10-year span. And that's the same period of time that we're talking about when people migrated largely over to digital platforms. And so when analysts see a chart like this is same-day ratings, and they start to see it dipping down some, or when they see a chart like this, pay TV net additions, which is bumping along, you might say it's dropping. Some people argue it is. Other people argue that it's flat. But one thing everybody seems to agree on is TV is not growing anymore. The analysts start to get very concerned about the future of TV. They wonder, is this the time where television is about to get disrupted the way the music business did? I'm not necessarily that pessimistic, but I think it's worth paying attention to these trends. The question is, will TV go through a graceful migration to this fully digital world, or is it going to face imminent catastrophic collapse? Interesting question. I think for the past few years, you saw a standoff where the TV industry looked at newcomers like Netflix and Hulu as something other than television. And so we had this kind of false dichotomy where it was TV versus the internet. And I think it's a pretty easy story to tell, right? Everybody loves a story of this team versus that team. It's like a sports analogy or war. It's the easiest story for a journalist to write. And so that story got a lot of currency in the press, but I think it's misleading. That said, the TV industry has done an extraordinary job of defending itself from competition. It hasn't gotten exploded by the internet. That's because TV is really good at fighting the future. They have a lot of weapons at their disposal. Content lockout. For instance, if you think of HBO's relationship with Netflix, where they simply cross their arms and say, no way, no chance, we're never going to license you one frame of video, it'll never happen. Content lockout is backed up by lobbying for favorable treatment in Washington, litigation, so if a company comes along like Aereo that does something broadcasters don't like, they sue them, and the goal is to sue them into submission or maybe to sue them into complete oblivion. And regulation, so if all else fails, you go to the FCC and you work a favor with the FCC. We've seen all of these tools used in one form or another to help stave off the future of television, to help hold it at bay, to keep those internet interlopers at a distance from the TV business. It's worked extraordinarily well. The other thing television's done is it's made kind of a milquetoast offering that isn't quite as disruptive, and in a way it's to hope maybe satiate the consumer's desire to see television on other devices. So we have TV Everywhere initiatives from companies like Comcast, from satellite companies like DirecTV, and actually a very good application from HBO, HBO Go, and then some other less inspired offerings from other cable channels. These don't drive revenue. And so my perspective on this is that it's a half-hearted attempt to stave off the inevitable, maybe take a little bit of the air out of the sails of the internet companies that might be disruptive. But it isn't ultimately something that these companies are fully committed to because it's not really going to grow their business in a significant way. It's a defensive move. The result of all this activity has been fragmentation on a massive scale, beginning with content fragmentation. So this is the single biggest problem for consumers today. When they go to a new device, they're looking for the kind of content that they're interested in. They navigate through a bewildering set of menus, and they finally get to a screen like this that says it's behind a paywall, and that's just super frustrating. Or you get to a screen where you can't find the show that you're looking for in certain services. So the content industry is cutting exclusive deals. This process isn't going to stop. Now we're seeing Netflix and Amazon are engaged in kind of a war of escalation to cut big deals. So we're going to be stuck in this fragmentation zone for a while. It's not just content fragmentation. We've also got device fragmentation. Just about every gizmo out there has a proprietary software system, proprietary SDK, proprietary API. So you need to go cut a deal with every manufacturer. The leading company in the field, Netflix, has cut deals with more than 800 device manufacturers. Think about that for a second. Did any of us ever expect to be in the software porting business? Is that the future that we really want to embrace for television? But no common standards really exist at this stage. So we have this massive inefficiency of porting our apps from device to device. If you want to compete with Netflix, you've got to do the same. And of course, we also have massive fragmentation in advertising. This is probably the most severe issue facing the industry, in the sense that if we can't get this straight, if we can't find a way to measure audience and value audience across all devices, it's never going to work. We're never going to get to the goal that we're seeking to arrive at. Tom Freston mentioned to me a while back, he said, TV is a lockbox exploding with cash. It's such a nice metaphor, isn't it? I just love that. And I think one of the results has been from all of this defensive activity that we've had over the last 10 years is that the TV industry actually has a kind of inflation happening right now. So when I talk to folks in the TV business, they always say, hey, Rob, you're always talking about the future. You're always talking about disruption. That's not happening. Our business is doing better than ever, right? You've heard that. You're nodding. You've heard that from TV people, right? They're kind of defiant about it. We're doing better than ever. That's true, but I think that we're running the risk of inflating the TV business in a dangerous way. There's certainly a sports bubble right now. So sports teams have gotten valued extraordinarily highly. And the sports packages are extraordinarily expensive as a result. So the sports industry is extracting a huge amount of revenue out of the TV business. You could argue that there's a carriage fee bubble going on, or maybe better put, a bundling bubble, whereby channels that really don't have a reason to exist on their own, because by virtue of the fact that they're part of a big bundle, they're able to extract a disproportionate amount of revenue out of the pay TV ecosystem. And I would also make the case that the broadcasters are experiencing a retransmission bubble, or they're about to. So they're now getting hooked on a new free revenue stream, retransmission fees, which didn't exist before. And if companies like Aereo are successful, that's going to go away. It could be a very dramatic outcome for them, because that's pure bottom line for them. Advertising bubble. This is one I was just thinking about yesterday, and it's a little bit debatable. When you talk to people about what's happening in TV advertising, you see charts like this. This one requires an explanation. The green line shows you that there's been a 50% ratings decrease since 2002. For primetime television. And the orange blob, that's broadcast ad revenues. And what this diagram's showing you is that it's dipped a little bit, but it's only a little bit below. It's only 6 or 7% below 2002. That's one way to look at it. And so broadcasters look at what's happening in the economy and they say, hey, in a downturn, TV is actually pretty resilient. We're doing pretty well. I look at it a little bit differently, and I think this is a matter of some concern for television, which is to say, if you look at the yellow line here in this chart, you can see that broadcast, the network share of households for ABC, CBS, and NBC has dropped significantly. And what's happening now is advertiser demand for those audiences is growing much faster than the decline. That's not sustainable. That can't be sustained. So if we're dependent on this for our future, there will come a point where the audiences simply aren't worth the amount that we're paying for them. So that's why I fear that what's happening is that the TV industry is getting inflated. By all this defensive activity, they're able to preserve pricing, even drive pricing up. And as a result, the contents are under pressure. I think television should probably come with a warning. Warning content under pressure, this may be a risk of explosive decompression. So this analogy that some people have been operating with, this idea that the internet is somehow the enemy, I think that's a false notion. And actually gratified to see that many TV companies are starting to come around. But we've been so entrenched for the last 10 years in our respective fields that unfortunately what's occurred is we've fragmented the landscape so much that from a consumer standpoint, these two options aren't actually the best options for them. From a consumer standpoint, the easiest way to get everything that I want to watch is this way. And this doesn't slow down either. So the technology for disruption might come here. This might be the pin that bursts the bubbles I just described. In the UK, just a few weeks ago, they introduced a new certified BitTorrent box. So it's a set-top box that looks just like a Roku box. It costs $99. I mean, basically it's a Roku device optimized for downloading illegal files to your television. Now, it's not here yet, but you better believe it's going to be here. It'll be here through the gray market in some fashion or another. This is a matter for concern for every company in this room, regardless of which side you're on the divide you're on, if you're in the TV business or if you're one of the internet companies that seeks to work with television companies. And I think this entire room needs to rally around this proposition because this is the future you need to fight. More than 10 years ago, Steve Jobs told us to think different. But for the TV industry, I'd argue the last 10 years it's been think the same. TV business hasn't really changed. It's been basically double down on the current model, do everything you can to preserve it. My view is if you want to be successful in the future, you have to think disruptive. You have to start to adopt the thought process of the companies that will come in and change the entire industry. And let me share with you a couple thoughts about what that might entail. See, every industry's got blind spots, and the incumbents in every business in particular have blind spots. It's things that they cannot see. They're not able to see from their vantage point. For instance, a TV industry executive, if I were to show them this picture, let's say the home video folks here, if a distribution and sales folks, if I were to show you this picture, I'd say, what do you see? They'd say, well, I see 3 screens. So that's great. I can license my content to more screens. There's more providers. And actually, that's a great new business. SVOD is definitely emerging as a viable business. I don't think it's a big enough business to backfill or offset the loss of the DVD revenue. But nevertheless, it's a viable strategy. But when a disruptive company looks at this, what they see is something radically different. They see something TV people don't see. They see an invisible layer of software linking all these devices together. And with that invisible layer of software, they're going to enable consumers to do things they couldn't do before. New ways to browse, download, discover, and monetize content. New ways to organize that content, play it back, create your own personal playlist, control it, play it on your terms. And new ways to share that content, recommend it, and virally promote it. That's a radically new proposition. But if you've used Apple AirPlay or if you're familiar with DLNA, I know Dan Wilkins is in the audience from Packet Video. They're working on initiatives like this. You're going to find that increasingly people are expecting the ability for them to download content from whatever source they wish, bypass the pay TV infrastructure entirely, and begin to manipulate it, play it back on different devices, talk about it with their friends, and so on. I know many of the folks in this room are working on those solutions. And if you're in the home video business today, these are the people you need to talk to because they're really working hard to solve that problem for you. How to connect with an audience on multiple devices, how to span all those different tablets and phones and so on. It isn't just second screen companies. In fact, video on mobile devices is all of the innovation in the video business today. I would argue that the future of video is on mobile devices. And the evidence I would use isn't necessarily the companies in this room, though they're doing a great job. It's companies like these. If you're not familiar with these social video companies, they're doing extraordinarily well. Some of them are adding 1 million new users a week. So these are companies that come out of nowhere. Some of them are less than a year old, and they're growing at an extraordinary rate. I know Social Vibe has broken the 40 million mark. Uvu apparently is adding 1 million users every 10 days. So these companies are growing incredibly fast. These are social video. They aren't television per se, but they do enable consumers to have an extraordinary amount of control over the video, and video as a form of communication, not just passive consumption. New media require that we adopt a new attitude. Think about real time. You've heard the phrase a lot. We think about it a lot. But TV is still largely a seasonal business. We still talk about fall season. We still talk about spring season. What's changed everything in the world, I think, is Twitter. So Twitter dominates the real-time space. Twitter's trained us to expect real-time. I was in China during the election, during the presidential election in November. And I was desperate to figure out what was going on. I couldn't find out any news, what was happening. I knew the election was happening. I knew the polls were closing. And I was trying to figure it out. But, China has their kind of firewall around the internet, so it's not that easy to find out what's happening. And eventually I tried CNN. I tried the other news sources. They didn't have any kind of polls, any kind of information. So naturally I went to Twitter, which is where you can find out this information. What's interesting is just in the last couple of years, less than 5 years, Twitter has conditioned the entire industry, the news industry, but also consumers, that they're where you go for real-time news and information. And it's weird to me how journalists have freely conceded that position to Twitter. So they occupy that space. That's really important because now that Twitter's entering television, they're going to bring that real-time mentality into the TV business with their recent social video acquisitions. In terms of television, the TV industry has started to adapt to this real-time mentality a little bit. They're trying to program for the permanent present. There's the end of the the advent of the 24-hour news cycle and kind of the end of the pilot season. Now we're in kind of permanent pilot season where all the TV companies are constantly developing new shows and trying them out and trying out replacements and so on. I think also the introduction of some elements of live internet, live blogging, live chat, and so forth. You can start to see this kind of, this real-time mentality starting to emerge around the periphery of TV programming. But I'd argue that when TV truly goes to the internet, you're going to have to see a massive change, not in the programming necessarily, but in the way we do business. So when real-time hits TV, we're going to have the ability to buy and sell audiences in real time. We're going to have the ability to target specific individuals in the home. We're going to have real-time bidding exchanges, which are commonplace on the web, and this has transformed web advertising. When you talk to the big media buyers, they now are allocating 35–40% of their buy for real time. And that's going to increase. Every year that's going to increase, and eventually that's going to come to television as well. That will totally change the way we think about selling. So instead of getting everything ready for a spring upfront and spending millions of dollars on a big event that a few hundred people attend, that's kind of an ancient idea, the upfront. The idea of gearing everything up for sweeps, one time we're going to be evaluated. This real-time mentality means that we're going to be auctioning audiences off all the time, 24 hours a day, year-round, constantly. That's going to require an entirely different way to measure audience and an entirely different way to sell. Second big idea for you is big data. We hear the term all the time. But in the TV business, when we hear that term, we typically think of IBM doing a big buy on broadcast television. So it's not really something that TV companies are acquainted with or operating with. How many people saw the movie Moneyball? Okay, great. So most of the people here. And you'll recall that Jonah Hill played that kind of quant jock geek who had a radical new notion, which is that you can actually measure the performance and do some analytics on different players and value them differently and assemble a team based on math. And you'll probably remember the part where the scouts, they really rebelled against this, and one of them walks out. It's a big dramatic scene and so forth in that movie. What you might not realize is that quant jocks now are starting to spread through every business, every industry that's on the network, beginning with the financial industry, most recently venture capital, which used to be the ultimate gut play. Now they're using as much analytics as they possibly can to make their decisions before they invest. In fact, they've said now, there are VCs who've said, don't come to us for money. We'll find you. If your metrics are sufficiently interesting, if they match our investment thesis, we'll find you. We just need the numbers. We don't need to hear your pitch. Advertising is rapidly turning into a quantitative business, and even healthcare and medicine is turning into a quantitative business. You remember, think about the doctor who used to make a gut call. He would look at you, he'd check out your symptoms, and then he would make a decision. Rapidly now, that's changing into a quantitative analysis field, particularly in managed care facilities in those big, huge HMOs. So Fitbit, you're probably familiar with the quantified life movement, which is very popular now. That's the idea that you measure everything in your life. You measure how much you're eating, you measure how much you walk, how much you move during the day, and you can kind of keep track. It's actually quite addictive. People love this. So you may be thinking, this will never happen to television, will it? In the disruptive mind, it certainly will. It's bound to. And probably one way it's going to occur is the A/B test. If you're not familiar with an A/B test, this is a principle that Google was very fond of, and they kind of promoted it. Other companies have used it in software for years. The idea is on a network, you can divert half your audience to see one proposition, A, and the other half gets to see a different proposition, B, and you can see which one converts better. And so you could try a red background or a blue background, and if the blue background converts at a couple percentage points higher, you kill the red background, and now you start doing tests on the blue background. And so today, A/B testing has gotten quite sophisticated. You have a dashboard like this that gives you real-time analysis of how your offer is working, how it's converting. You may be surprised to know how many people are using this. This is prevalent on the internet. So Google, as I said, is a huge promoter of this. Anybody doing marketing has been using A/B testing now for the better part of the decade to test their proposition. Email marketing is A/B tested like crazy because it's so easy to see what converts, what drives a click. You kill the version that doesn't. You iterate on the version that succeeds. But what's strange or maybe surprising is that now web developers, people who are publishing on the internet, the Huffington Post, and probably most importantly, game companies, are focused on A/B testing for their content. So they're actually using this to generate content. They're testing content propositions, headlines, body copy, colors, pictures, photos, so on, anything. And whatever flies works. You may notice this if you look at the Huffington Post on two different computers, or you have two different browsers open and you load the same page, you may discover there's two different headlines. You may even discover there's a different picture, different copy. So they're doing real-time A/B testing. And I believe that this will come to television. Now, if there's programming people in the audience, they're probably going, no way, dude, we're never going to quantify the production of content, the creation of content. Well, you may never. But trust me, somebody coming from the internet side, somebody who thinks disruptively is likely to do that. The second part of big data is the question, what's your proprietary data asset? This question was put to me by a very successful investor at Union Square Ventures in New York. And these are some of the companies that they've invested in. They have a phenomenal portfolio. And what distinguishes these companies is that they all have a proprietary data asset that is generated by the users of their service. That means the more people use your service, the more data they get, and that data becomes the most valuable thing about the company. Let's compare proprietary data assets. Of course, television companies do have a proprietary asset. It's their shows, right? The TV series. Internet companies, their proprietary asset is generally user data. The availability of these two, well, TV shows are expensive, so they're scarce. Internet data from users, it's free, it's abundant. And so as a result, one group's got a huge amount of content, or data, I should say, at their disposal. The other group has a rather restricted pool of data, and it's diminishing value. The marketing around this, well, for the proprietary data asset of television requires a giant marketing campaign for people to discover it and find it. For a web service, generally speaking, the service is designed to be viral so the users market it to each other. The security that we wrap around this, well, the problem with the data asset of the television industry is it's extremely easy to copy and steal, whereas the web services, their proprietary asset, that user data, sits on a server. It's almost impossible to steal unless somebody's a really sophisticated hacker. The value of a TV asset, TV program, is actually relatively quickly depleted, particularly now as things are moving over to SVOD rather quickly. So the value gets squeezed out fast, where with a web service, that user data, it gets more valuable the more people use it, and it seems to grow forever. Finally, there's two totally different business models. Pay me up front, that's your TV business model, versus the web service where we invite other companies to come in and use that data and build on top of it and add even more value to it so it continues to grow. Two totally different approaches to data, and perhaps a mindset that the television company could benefit from studying. Let's talk a little bit about unbundling and the end of channels. I've talked previously in LA about what happens when channels go away, what happens when the container gets broken apart and the content in it starts to spill out and spread out everywhere. My belief is that your programming executives have to start to think omni-channel. In other words, distribution across all platforms. Today, too often, when we're programming a new show, we're developing a new show, we think about the TV experience first. That makes sense. They have to make it work there. You have to have a hit on television. But too rarely do we spend enough time thinking about what else are we developing for. What's the mobile experience? What's the online experience? What's the social experience? What's the game experience? Too rarely are the TV executives responsible for creating the show also tasked with that second set of responsibilities. And I think that's a critical flaw in the way we do programming today. Some people wonder what happens to TV when you can get everything on demand. What will happen to channels? And my expectation is channels will probably go away. I doubt in a fully on-demand world you'll need to have a TLC or an MTV anymore as a container for those shows. People will seek out shows. Shows may become a destination. Now, recently there was a lot of chatter around Netflix and the launch of House of Cards, because here's a company that doesn't have channels and they're trying to launch a show, and they bought a bunch of billboards and a lot of other advertising to promote it. And so some people say, well, there's a textbook example of how to market without a channel. I'd argue that actually there's a better lesson by studying Red Bull, which is an extraordinary company. They've become a phenomenal media powerhouse, and they did something quite extraordinary with the Red Bull Stratos campaign back in September. So you remember this. This is an Austrian daredevil named Felix Baumgartner. He went up in a hot air balloon to the highest point in the stratosphere and then leaped out and plummeted down to Earth. What was interesting about this is that it cost them millions of dollars to develop. They haven't released the figures, but it's estimated it cost them more than $5 million, perhaps as much as $10 million to produce this event. It also took 5 years to prepare, but they couldn't schedule it. It was just like launching the space shuttle or launching something into space. If the weather conditions weren't quite right, they couldn't launch the thing. So you couldn't schedule it. In other words, here they had an event that they'd spent millions of dollars building or preparing for, but they weren't able to guarantee that they could drive an audience. They couldn't promote it in a traditional way. And so what Red Bull did, which is really quite brilliant, is they assiduously built up their social media. And they figured, we're going to go to our users first. And the results were phenomenal. So when the Red Bull Stratos campaign began, when Felix Baumgartner said, okay, today's the day, we're going to launch, let's get ready, they immediately started to blast it out to the people in their social network. And so 1 million unique participants heard about this and retweeted it or forwarded it or posted it or commented. They had about 2 million unique actions. That means everybody did two things, posted 2 things. They reached a total of 90 million people. 8 million people tuned in and watched the live event purely through social media. And in the process, they got 2 million more people to sign up for their channel, so they actually got another 2 million subscribers. Oh, by the way, in addition, every major news outlet covered the story, and they called it the Red Bull Stratos project, so they got their name built into the story headlines. Really, quite a brilliant execution and a great illustration of how to market without a channel. So as you can see from those examples, as we move into the strange new world of the second screen or multi-screen or content that flows from one screen to another, it requires us to adapt some different attitudes. Let me close with a couple of comments about what we're going to discuss today. So the second screen project is in that tough phase right now of fragmentation. And I put up here this thing that I guess looks like the Olympic symbol. I didn't intend it to look like that, but I was trying to think of a way to kind of classify the different things. When you talk to different companies working in the second screen category, some of them are really focused on creating a screen guide for a company like Comcast. I'm thinking of ZBox, for instance, their deal with Comcast. Other companies are really focused on working with advertisers. So there are companies that are specifically focused on helping the advertisers reach people and get a call to action on television and drive them to a second screen app. Others are working with channels or perhaps at the level of a show to create an experience that's really deep and really wedded to that brand. Then, of course, you've got the big social networks, which is where most of the second screen activity still happens, Facebook and Twitter. And then another group of people is focused on the user. And they're trying to say, well, actually, the user has a different set of needs. We're trying to define those requirements and make the easiest tool possible for them to find and discover. And so I thought I'd offer this, which is a work in progress. It's an idea that I was working on to think, how would you, if you were new to the category, how might you classify these different companies? And I thought, well, there's shallow and deep, right? There are some companies that are trying to enable everything on their platform. So by definition, they have shallow experiences. Other companies are approaching it where they work with a specific show or a specific sport or a specific channel, and they're making really deep experiences. You typically have to work closely with the content owner in order to do that. It's hard to do that from the outside. Some people are trying. If you go across, there's really 2 different axes there as well. Social discovery is something that happens before you watch the show. Social engagement, where I'm talking about the show, obviously that's got to happen live with the show. And this is a really interesting one to think through because you have to consider your user really carefully. What are they looking for and what kind of event is it? So for a live event, sports event, for instance, the synchronous social engagement is going to make a huge amount of sense. But for other things like long-tail content or dramatic series that are available on a lot of different platforms and different time windows, you may find that asynchronous discovery is probably more important. So those are some thoughts for you today. The great thing is everybody here in this room is working on solving these problems. If you're coming today from a broadcasting company, a cable channel, or a home video organization, I encourage you to meet up with and talk to the companies in this room because they are working on the solutions. They are not your enemy. They're your friend. They're on your side. And thanks for joining me as we think through the unthinkable.
Thank you, Robert. Fantastic.